Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Lizzie Fulton, and I'm a staff attorney. Can everybody hear me? I'm a staff attorney with Unlocal. And so today we're going to be talking about pro se motions to change venue. And that means when people who are in removal proceedings need to change the location of their court from one city to another, they need to file a motion to change venue. So we're going to be talking about how to do that today. So the agenda for today, first I'll introduce the Pro Se Plus project that we're a part of. We'll be talking about what constitutes a motion to change venue, all the information that you'll need to support someone to actually submit this motion, how to mail out this motion and where, and then separately how to also update a new address with ICE and with USCIS, which are separate from the motions to change venue. And then lastly, we'll have time for some questions. So just to begin, we're here as part of the Pro Se Plus project, which is a consortium of organizations here in New York that is intended to support immigrants who are not represented in their case by attorneys in being able to complete basic tasks in immigration court and with USCIS, which includes like filing an asylum application, applying for a work permit, changing venue, and understanding the basics of the immigration system. So changing venue, I'm going to explain what this means. So venue is the legal term for where the immigration court is located. And so when one person moves from one city to another, they need to change venue from the court that they currently have their case in to a court in the new city where they live. And this is required by immigration court. So like I mentioned, when someone changes the location of their immigration court, this isn't the last step they have to do. There are other steps that they need to take to change their address with all of the other respective agencies that are part of the Department of Homeland Security. And this is done separately. So just to begin, the reasons why someone would need to change their venue in immigration court. This is very common when people enter the United States, especially when they enter on the border, usually through Texas or California. They're going to be assigned to an immigration court where they entered, especially if folks have been detained. And so a lot of people will have their court hearing scheduled in Texas, for example, but after they were released from detention, they moved to a new city like New York, and now they want to attend immigration court in New York. And so they have to change venue so that their case is actually moved to New York instead of stuck in Texas. And if they don't do so, they have to attend their immigration hearing in Texas. This is also true if someone moves to be near family or for any reason. So if you move from New York to Kentucky, you need to change venue to Kentucky. So basic information that people need to change their court hearing location. The primary thing is the individual's A number. And this is the number that's assigned to all people in removal proceedings. That's a unique identification number. It's made up of 9 digits. And in order to be able to submit a motion, you need this number, which can be found on immigration documents. People will also need a document called a notice to appear. And that's how they understand exactly where their immigration court is located. And ideally, they'll provide proof of address in New York to show the reason that they actually are living in New York and they need to change their hearing to New York. So that could be truly anything, a piece of mail that someone has received, something with their name and their address on it. If they have some sort of ID that has their address on it, something that shows that they're living in New York. So let me talk about the A number. So basically, in order to find out where someone currently has their immigration court hearing, because people don't always know, if they don't have their notice to appear, which I'll show you on the next slide, they can look up in the online EOIR system. And EOIR is the immigration court. So they can look up their A number in the system to find out where and when their next court date is. And so we have that link here. And also a phone number. And the link is also available in Spanish. And when someone calls, there's also a Spanish language option. But with your A number, your 9-digit A number, by visiting the website or by calling, you enter in the A number when prompted, and you'll get information about where your next court hearing is. And this is important because you need to know where you're switching the venue from. So these are some sample documents. A notice to appear is the notice that is served on immigrants that begins their removal processes in immigration court. And this is a very important paper to have that people receive when they arrive, because it contains everyone's A number and also where they need to appear for their first immigration court. And so if people lose this paper, you can find out where your immigration court is through the link and the phone number that we just provided, but it will be important to have this document. There's other documents that will contain people's A number, for example, Form I-385, which is the notice to report to ICE. Also Form I-220A, which is an order of release on recognizance that some people will receive when they're released from detention. This also contains someone's A number and the address of the ICE office where people have to report, which will be in the city where you have your immigration case. So for folks who are assisting people in changing their venue, who are not attorneys, and that's who this presentation is directed towards, it's really important that as a non-attorney who's assisting someone in doing these processes in immigration court, that you explain the services you're providing and be very clear that you're not an attorney representing them in court. So just clarify that they should continue to seek representation with an attorney for their case. And if possible, provide an outlined agreement that explains that you're assisting them and that you're not an attorney. In terms of the forms that are needed to change venue, primarily we will need a motion, and we're going to show you an example of what that looks like. And a motion includes a brief argument as to why you need to change venue, an order which the judge will sign when it's granted or denied, and a certificate of service that shows that this was also mailed to ICE, which is required as part of the motion. Another form that needs to be included is called EOIR 33, and this is the form that actually registers the change of address with the court. And this form is also used if someone moves addresses within the same city. So even if they're not changing court, if you move from one apartment to another, you always have to file this document with court so that your address is updated in their system. And this is really important in case the court sends a notice and you don't receive it. If you haven't updated your address, then that's going to be the fault of the person who didn't update their address. So it's always important to update. And then lastly, the form EOIR 61 is for those who are assisting people in filing pro se documents with the immigration court. So this is intended for people assisting immigrants in court who are not attorneys or licensed representatives. And so they can fill out this document to show that they help prepare these documents. So we're just going to go through the steps of what's required to file a motion to change venue. So like I explained before, the most important thing to know is where the court is currently located for your case. So you can do this by taking your A number and either going to this website and entering it in or calling the hotline that was provided previously. Once you enter your A number, you're going to see this page online, and it's going to tell you when your next hearing is, with which judge, and the court address. So if your court is currently in Texas, it's going to give you a date and a time and a judge with a Texas court, and you're going to have that court address. So if you've already moved to New York, then you need to change your address. You need to change the venue of your court from Texas to New York. If when one enters their A number, no information pops up, that generally means that the notice to appear, which really initiates removal proceedings, hasn't yet been filed in court. And so it has to be filed in court for you to be able to change venue. So if nothing pops up when you enter the A number, either online or on the phone, that means that you actually can't do anything right now because you don't currently have a case that's being processed in immigration court. And for people who have recently arrived, that can take a few months sometimes. I mean, usually it's faster than that, but it can take a little while. And sometimes it's never filed at all, which is a mistake that's made by ICE, who doesn't actually properly file the documents, but it does happen very regularly. So unless there is like a court assigned to the case and a court hearing that's upcoming, then you can't change venue. Okay, so the next step is about the actual contents of a motion. And I'm going to show you on the next slide what this looks like. But the motion contains a very simple cover page that has the names. If it's one individual, it'll be their name. If they have a spouse and children who are part of their case, it will be everyone's name and all of their A numbers. There will be an actual motion, which really just needs to be one page explaining why you need to change location from one place to New York. Another page, which is an order for the judge to sign, either granting the motion or denying the motion. And then lastly is what's called a certificate of service, which basically documents that this motion was also mailed to ICE. And the court won't accept a motion unless you also document that you've also served it on ICE. So important things to note are, for families who have cases together, you have to list everyone's names and A numbers. Make sure that they're spelled the same way that they show up in the court records. Sometimes they spell them strangely, but make sure it's consistent. In the motion, which will show you, it's important to explain why it's necessary to change venue from one place to another. And then the person who is in proceedings will need to review and sign the document. And then whoever is mailing this out, which is usually the person who's assisting them, will sign the certificate of service, which documents that they served these documents on ICE. You see this? Okay. So this is a sample of what a motion to change venue looks like. So the first page is just the cover page. And for people who are doing this, you just need to work off of a template, and they're pretty widely available online. And so you don't have to create it from scratch. But in the left, you put the address of the person who's filing the documents. On the right, if the person is not detained, assuming that they're living in the community and they're not in a detention center, you put not detained. At the top, you put which immigration court you are mailing the motion to. It's important to note that the motion has to go to the court in the city where your case is currently. So if your case is in Texas and you want to move it to New York, you need to be sending this motion to Texas. You need to be sending it to that judge, because that's the judge who's going to grant or deny this motion. So here at the top, you're going to write, you're going to put Texas under immigration court, whichever city in Texas the case is located. And then below, when it says in the matter of, that's where you list the name of the respondent, who's the person who's in removal proceedings. And if they have children and or a spouse who's affiliated with this case, you list everybody's name. And then next to it, where it says file number, that's the same as the A number, also known as the alien number of 9 digits. And you need to list everybody's A number. Below that, you list who the immigration judge is. And again, that's the information you can find online in the EOIR system or through the hotline. And the hearing date, which is available in the same location. And then the title of the motion is called Respondent's Pro Se Motion to Change Venue. So just write that in bold letters so the judge knows exactly what you're trying to do. And just to explain really quickly, the word motion, when you're moving the court to do something, it just means you're asking the court to do something. So when you're submitting a motion, that means you're asking the court, will you change this location from Texas to New York? So you're moving them to do something. So this middle page, which is the second page, this is where you explain the reasons why you want to change venue. And so it can be very simple. You can explain that, and so there's language here that can be copied that includes a statute. And so just use a template, fill in the right information. And then you explain, I currently have a case scheduled in Texas, but I do not live in Texas anymore. In fact, I live in New York. I live there with family. That's where I have a support system. I am unable to travel back to Texas because I do not have enough money and I have no means to travel. In New York, I am looking for an attorney and I might have someone who might be able to represent me. For these reasons, I need to switch my case to New York because that's where I have my support system. That's where I live. That's where I have a job. Any reason why you need to justify why you're living in New York and not somewhere else. It can be pretty simple. And then you sign it and date it. The applicant, the respondent signs it. And like I mentioned before, if they have any proof of their New York address, they should include that right behind this argument. And so that could be a piece of mail that has a name and address, a bank statement if someone's already opened a bank account, a library card that might indicate their address or just that they live in New York. Anything that shows that they live in New York, a utilities bill. But if people are recently arrived and they don't have anything, usually it's not expected of a pro se motion where the standards are pretty low. So this next page is an order. And this has to be included in all motions to immigration judges. And this is the order that the judge then signs, either granting the motion or denying the motion. And so this just needs to be copied and included in the motion. And here it says, upon consideration of the respondent's pro se motion to change venue, it is hereby ordered that the motion be either granted or denied. The judge will check one of those boxes. We'll check in a box explaining why, and we'll sign this document and we'll send it back. The last page is a proof of service, which is the same as the certificate of service, which I mentioned. And I'm going to explain how to find the address for this. But what this is showing that you have also served this motion on ICE. And so this is the ICE office that has attorneys who are also litigating these cases. And so for everything that you file or submit to court, you also need to mail to the corresponding ICE office, and you need to have this proof that you did so. So you fill out the date that you mailed it. So on June 14, the person who's actually mailing it, so whether that is the actual respondent who has a case in court or their friend or their family who's helping them file this. So whoever's mailing it, you write your name, and then you write the address of the ICE office where it's being mailed to. I'll explain how to find that. And then the method of delivery. So if you're doing it by mail, actually for these purposes, it will all be by mail because the online system to serve them is really only available to attorneys. So you're going to say that you sent it by mail and then sign it and date it on the date that you mailed it out. Okay. So in order to find out where the address is for the ICE office, so the court address can be found through the immigration court system, the EOIR system. So the address that you have is just the address that you need to mail the motion to. Another copy that needs to be mailed to ICE can be found at this link here. So the ICE office that has that's in charge of sending attorneys to litigate these cases in immigration court is called OPLA, because ICE has all these different branches. So you're going to be looking for the ICE OPLA office that's in the city where the immigration court is. And so by going to this link, you can find out the ICE address, which often is in the same courthouse or the same building as the immigration court. Not always. And then you need to mail it to that ICE address too. So whenever you have the actual motion, make a copy of it. And you have to also mail the same exact thing to ICE, including the proof of service, everything. And So the last thing that needs to be included in the motion is form EOIR 33, which actually registers the change of address. And so both are needed for the change of address, for the change of venue. So the EOIR 33, like I mentioned, this is included in the motion, but it's also required whenever anyone moves addresses, even within the same city. And so it's always critical to update the court of your address, because if they mail a notice and you don't receive it because you didn't update them, then you really might miss an immigration court hearing. You might get a removal order. You will miss critical notices. So it's really important that you always update your address with court. So EOIR 33, you just need to download the form from the website, and the link is here. And what's important is that for each family member who's part of a case, every single person needs to fill out their own form. And so this is what the form looks like. And so what's important to know is, so you have to list someone's name and their A number. And like I said, if it's a mother who's here with 3 children, you need to fill out 4 different forms, one for each person. You have to put the old address on the left and the new address on the right. And that can be tricky because sometimes people have their court venued in Texas and they didn't have a stable address. So I think whatever address they presume to have given to immigration at the time, they need to put that address there. But what's really important is that they put their new address on the right side and their phone number, their contact information. They need to sign it. And then the proof of service showing that it was also sent to ICE is actually on the same page. And so whoever is assisting them in actually mailing this out will sign it. And they need to write the ICE OPLA office address down below to show that they also sent a copy to ICE. So if it's a family of 4 people, they need to do 4 different forms and then make a copy of everything. You need to make 2 copies of everything because you want a copy for your own records, and you need to send a copy to ICE. It's important to note that for children who are under the age of 14, they don't need to sign it themselves. Their parents can sign it for them. But over the age of 14, then those children need to sign the form themselves. So EOIR 61. This form is newly required, and this is for people who are assisting applicants pro se who are not registered like legal representatives or attorneys. And this is a form just to document the information of the person who's assisting them in preparing this information. And so it's pretty self-explanatory, but I'll show you an example. So this is the form. And so you'll see that at the top, you put the information of the person who's in proceedings, so the respondent. And then in the middle where it says entry of limited appearance for, you check the box that says motion because you're just helping them with a motion. And the description would be a motion to change venue. So it's a very limited representation for this particular motion. Proceeding type, it gives you the option of either bond. So if it's for a bond hearing, which this is not, or other, you check other and you write removal because these proceedings are all called removal proceedings. Then below that, it gives you an option to check off how you identify as the representative. And so you're not an attorney. It's the 4th box down that says, I am a reputable individual as defined by the relevant statute. So I don't know why they're called a reputable individual, but that is what the category is. And so that's what you check off. And then sign it, fill out your information. There's also a proof of service on the next page where you document that you mailed this form as well to the relevant ICE office. Even if this is all in one packet, you just have to include the proof of service for everything. Okay, so actually mailing it out, like I said, it's important to make sure that you mail it all to the correct addresses. So in order to actually assemble the motion, this is what the motion needs to include. The actual motion, which is the cover letter, the motion, which includes the argument as to why you need to change venue from one city to New York. If you have a proof of address in New York, include that. You include the judge's order that they sign, either granting or denying the motion. and the proof of service, which is always has to be the last page. And also Form EOIR 33 also goes into that motion, which registers the change of address with the court. So it's a bunch of documents that all need to be included in one packet. What's important is this exact packet needs to be copied multiple times, one for the person's own records. And that's important because sometimes people mail it off and they don't actually have proof that they mailed it, and they don't have proof that they registered their current address with the court. And this is important because if the mail never arrives, or if the court claims that they sent it to an address, even though you changed it, you need to show that you actually did file this change of address. And so it's not your fault that you didn't receive a court notice. And you need to make another copy to mail the exact packet to the ICE office that's corresponded with the immigration court. So it has to be sent to ICE, it has to be sent to the court, and you have to keep a copy for your own records. So in terms of actually sending a motion, the length of time it takes for a judge to make a decision on the motion can really vary. Sometimes if it's not urgent, the judge just won't make a decision for a very long time. It could even be months, or they could make a decision in a week. If someone has an upcoming court hearing, so if you have a hearing on July 5th in Texas, but you live in New York and you're trying to change venue to New York, you really need to be calling the court and checking on the status of the motion. If the motion is not granted, you have to attend your hearing in Texas, unfortunately, because if you fail to attend, then you will probably get a removal order. And so what you can do in order to actually reach someone at the court is you find the relevant court. So if you're changing from a court in Harlingen, Texas, you go online, you look up EOIR Harlingen, and there will be a phone number associated with that court. Call that phone number. People don't always answer, but you got to keep trying. And so eventually the court clerk will answer, and you explain that you're assisting someone that has a hearing in front of such and such judge, and you need to get the phone number of that judge's assistant. And that clerk will give you the phone number of that judge's assistant. You call that assistant and you explain, I submitted a motion, a pro se motion on behalf of this person who has an upcoming hearing. They no longer live in Texas, they live in New York. We need the judge to issue a decision on this motion. And usually the legal assistant can put pressure on the judge. And so it's important to always follow up on this. It's also important that when you mail the motion, that you mail it in a way that the mail can be tracked. Because if you just send it with a few stamps and it gets lost, you'll never know if it was actually received by the court. So make sure that it's being mailed in a way that you have a tracking number to ensure that it actually arrives at the court. One way to know that the motion has been granted is to keep checking online in the EOIR online system or through the hotline, because if the motion has been granted, then in the system, it'll show up as you having a case in New York and no longer in Texas. And so it'll populate with the information about your next court hearing in New York once venues actually changed to New York. So that's one way to know that it's been successfully changed. But generally, when you provide the new address, the court will be mailing a decision to that address. And so that's the way that you get a decision on the motion. It's just that mail can be really slow. And so it might show up in the system much sooner than you actually receive the notice by mail. So quickly, the purpose of all of that is to change the location of the court hearing from a city that it was originally registered in to New York, where someone has currently moved to and lives in and needs their court hearing to take place in. This is different than updating address with ICE and with USCIS. And so a reason to be updating an address with ICE is if someone is registered to have ICE check-in, which is the case with a lot of recently arrived people. That they're mandated to check in with ICE at certain times and places. And so if you've moved from Texas to New York, you can't be checking in with ICE in Texas. You need to be registering your change of address to New York. I will say that this PowerPoint is already updated because there's a brand new change in how to update your address with ICE that just happened, but it's way simpler. So I'm just going to say it out loud, but it's not written down here. but there's a website that is www.onlinechangeofaddress.ice.gov. So that's online changeofaddress.ice.gov. And that'll take you to a website where someone can just follow the prompts and register their change of address with ICE. So you can choose your language, and then it allows you to fill in your address. It's going to validate the address, so it needs to recognize it as a validly acceptable address. My understanding is that it's not really accepting the addresses of churches or shelters if that's where someone's currently residing. It's really only accepting residential addresses, so I don't know the get around, like how to get around that. I think if one is not able to enter an address of where they're actually living, if it's not a residential address, then they should just update their address with the process that we have here on the PowerPoint, which is through this website, ice.gov/contact/check-in, to figure out what ICE location you're supposed to be checking in at, and then submitting the EOIR 33 form that was submitted to court to ICE. There's also this email address if you want to submit it to New York ICE. Just take a copy of the EOIR 33 that was mailed to court and just email it to this the New York ICE address to explain that you now live in New York, and so you need your check-ins to take place in New York. So the last form of address that people might need to update, but depending on whether they have filed applications, is with USCIS. And that's the US Citizenship and Immigration Services. And this is the agency under the Department of Homeland Security that processes visas, green cards, employment authorization documents. And so this is relevant for two reasons. One, if someone has submitted a work permit application, which is form I-765, then this is under the jurisdiction of USCIS. And so they're going to be mailing all of their correspondence to the address they have on file. So if someone moves to a different address, they need to update their address online with USCIS, or honestly, they may never receive these documents. And it's a very long process if they send it to the wrong address to actually get those documents. So it's very important that people register their change of address with USCIS and that they keep a copy of that in their records. So this is all done online. It's called Form AR11, and it's available at the link that we have. But if someone just looks up USCIS AR11, then there's prompts to just register the change of address online. And this is also the case if someone has applied for asylum, but they're not in removal proceedings. So if they arrive to New York with a visa, but they're applying for asylum, they're not in proceedings in immigration court, they file their asylum application with USCIS, they need to update their address so that all the information gets sent to the right address. And that is all the information. It was a lot of information and very technical. So we'll take a moment and see if people have any questions about this.
I actually have a question. Earlier, when you're saying change of address, you put your old address and your new address, but sometimes you might not know what your old address was. Is that going to show up when you run your A number on the website?
No, it doesn't show up. So usually on the notice to appear, which is the notice that you receive shortly after you arrive at the border, that basically is initiating removal proceedings. Your address should be on there. But if it's not, I don't think that there's a problem if you put the wrong old address, or maybe just say, do not know. I mean, as long as you have the new address, that's what's important. And I would just suggest that people make their best guess. Yeah, because some people don't register an address when they arrive, and so, yeah.
We have a question from Anne here. She says, where do I sign the E61 of a reputable individual? Is a reputable individual considered a representative, or should we just invest?
Yeah, so that form can be found online. And so really someone just needs to look up EOIR 61 and it will take you to the relevant page, like in the Department of Justice website, and you can download it from there. A reputable individual is just the term for truly anyone who's assisting someone pro se. And so that can be a friend, a neighbor, someone working at Masa, someone who's not their attorney representative, but who's assisting them. It can be anybody. It's just a strange term that's written into the statute, but it's just anyone who's providing assistance.
Jacob is asking if someone files their I-589 online affirmatively and puts their current address but has never filled out an UIR 33 or an AR 11, will their address automatically update or should they still file these forms as well?
So if someone is filing their asylum application, I-589 online affirmatively, I guess an important thing to know is whether they're also in removal proceedings. This can be the case, for example, for an unaccompanied minor who might be in removal proceedings, but is actually eligible to file it affirmatively online, in which case they would have an interview with the asylum office rather than a hearing in court. But assuming this person is not in removal proceedings and is just filing with USCIS, they don't need to file EUIR 33 because that's only court specific. So any form that begins with EOIR assumes that you're in immigration court. So if you don't have a case in immigration court, you don't need to file a motion to change venue or anything because your case is just in front of USCIS and you just need to file the AR11 with USCIS. If you move, nothing is updated automatically, so you always have to file the AR11 online.
Apurva is asking, how do you suggest clients who are unable to afford FedEx shipping funding to be able to send these many copies for changes of address? Are there organizations that might provide funding for clients who are unable to afford it?
That's a good question because it can be very expensive. I mean, I think FedEx is probably the cheapest option is USPS. And it doesn't need to be sent priority mail. It can just be sent regular as long as you pay for tracking. But you'll be needing to send a copy to the court and a copy to ICE, so that can add up. I don't actually know about organizations who are providing funding for this specific purpose. I don't know if Masa knows or if my coworkers know.
In terms of sending this many copies, we always have the option of direct quote towards the public libraries in the city. Once they receive a New York City ID, they're able to get a library card and have some kind of support to print and to get copies. But in terms of shipping, USPS seems to be the most economic.
Claire's asking, when searching for the OPLA address, how to locate the correct city? Just nearest the respondent's address, or is there a system to match address to a particular office?
So to find the ICE OPLA address, so the ICE office that you need to serve the documents to, so there will be, if you go to the Department of Homeland Security ICE OPLA website, there's a way to search. And generally it just corresponds with the city where the court is. So like I said, if the city is Harlingen, Texas, you can go to the ICE OPLA site and you can search by city. So you'll be able to see all of the locations that ICE has an office in Texas, and you'll be able to find the Harlingen office. So it should be pretty self-explanatory. These motions are being served for this purpose to cities outside New York to change address to New York. New York is a special one because we have, 3 different immigration courts. And there are 2 different ICE OPLA addresses. But it will be pretty clear on the website based on which immigration court you're in, what address you need to send it to.
I would also add that the USCIS website has all the addresses for the courts and for the ICE office.
Yeah, that's right.
Jacob is asking, saying, thank you. What about if they have ICE check-ins but are not in court? Do they need to do the EOR 33?
So if someone has ICE check-ins, but they don't yet have a case in court, I would recommend that people go to the new address available to update your address with ICE, which is what I mentioned, changeofaddress.ice.gov. And just register with ICE because you don't need to change anything with court if you don't have a court hearing scheduled. However, if you're unable to register an address with that website for whatever reason, then I would recommend that people fill out the EOIR 33 and just email it to the ICE check-in address in New York. And this is going to ICE in New York to alert them that you're here now and that you want to be checking in with them.
And then I think, last question that we have on the panel is, the person who was working with can't get a marriage license because when he entered the country, Border Patrol didn't return his documents, so he has no ID in the photo. Is there a way to get those documents back?
Well, that's a separate question, but it's really difficult to get those documents back. I don't really have a good answer for that because there's no real process by which we can ensure that that happens. People can always try, but we haven't been successful in trying to get identity documents back. And so hopefully people would have enough documentation to be able to get new forms of ID in New York. Like an NYC ID, although if there's there are certain documents that are needed for that. I don't know if Ava, you want to speak to the other options, if you are familiar with them.
Yes, I think it's mostly recommended that we have folks get new identifications here in the city. Getting the New York City ID, they're requesting a minimal amount of documents and accept photocopies. So there are photocopies of any of those documents that BP didn't return. And I think also just what we've seen is that IDs with photos, date of birth, and current address. And sometimes that can be anything that you start to do here in the city, whether it's an OSHA identification card, your kind of membership card to either a gym or another membership kind of space, or a Parks and Recreation ID as well.
Yeah, and depending on what the ID is needed for, if it's needed for a work permit application, for example, people have also been successful just including a copy of their birth certificate, which does not include a photo, and then attaching a photo of themselves and writing an affidavit. Obviously, if this ID is being used for purposes outside of immigration, it's more complicated, but sometimes you can provide what you have on hand for immigration purposes.
And the last one is just a comment. Thank you so much for your answers and for all that you do with the immigrant community. You have no idea how helpful all the trainings have been in coming to work.
Okay, well, thank you to Masa for hosting this event. And thank you to Ava and Cindy.
For folks online, please fill out the survey, sign up for future trainings. Thank you.